We now turn to the problem of evil. The problem of evil is basically this argument that if God is omnipotent, then God has the ability to stop evil. If God is omniscient, then God knows what is evil. And if God is omnibenevolent, then God would not want people to suffer. Well, let's think about this for example. Let's suppose, like, any of you who may have children, nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, parents that you love. Okay, some of you don't love them. Not to say your kids, I hope, but but your brothers and sisters, a whole other story. I always tell my kids that my older son, I have two older brothers. I always say it's so nice to see a Mackenzie brother, an older Mackenzie brother who's nice. Their little Mackenzie brother. I've never seen that in my life. My brothers and I get along just fine, but I always joke that they were nothing but mean to me, and they obviously hated me. But the case is, let's suppose you love your brother, and as my brothers and I, we love each other. We just give each other a hard time. But let's suppose that we love each other, and you want your kid to do well. Well, the case is, suppose your kid becomes sick, and you're you're worried about your child's health. Well, the case is that as a parent, even though I don't want my kid, I love my kid, I'm all loving, I would do anything for my kid, I lack the ability to stop their suffering. So my omnipotence is lacking, but God's isn't. And so if somebody has the ability to stop my kid from suffering, but they don't, then one might say, well, maybe they're not all loving. Or if they love their kid but they don't stop it, it may be that they lack the ability to do it. And so the case is if you have both the omnipotence, both the power to stop the suffering and the desire to stop the suffering, then you should combine to stop the suffering, would be the argument. And yet, as a result, if God is omnipotent and omnibenevolent, then God not only has the desire and the ability to stop suffering, God should stop suffering. Yet suffering still exists. Yet evil still exists. Therefore, God must not be as conceived, is the argument. Why would God let people suffer? Why would God allow this? If God loves us, if God can do something about it, why does God allow it? That's what the problem of evil is. Now, some people sometimes say, well, that's sort of, they give all kinds of arguments. And the only thing I would say is, when we say evil exists, we can use evil to mean suffering of humans, suffering of animals, suffering of anything that causes pain, okay, is what we would consider evil. And people experience pain. People experience evil. People die, people get killed, people get diseases, people suffer. There's no question about that. There is evil, there is suffering. And yet, the idea would be is God does nothing about it. So why does God do nothing about it? Well, one of the things oftentimes that comes along is people oftentimes say, well, we're learning from it. We do all these things. People kind of try to trivialize it. And what I always say is I think a lot of you know what real suffering is and you understand this, but some of you also have had, I don't want to say easy lives. I'm not exactly, I've had some very negative things. I wouldn't say my life has been like a cakewalk by any means. But I at the same time, I have a good friend when my former wife was pregnant with my child, our first child, that when she was pregnant, one of my colleagues who had been trying, her and her husband had been trying for a while to get pregnant, and we happened to just, we were actually not wanting to have a baby at that time. But she got pregnant. That was fine. That was great. That was a blessing. I was at an age where I was like, yeah, that's great. I'm ready for kids. Let's have a kid. But we weren't necessarily trying or anything. And I had a colleague who had been trying for a while, and she got pregnant right around the same time, maybe a month or two after my wife. And, our baby was born, and my former wife went to the baby shower for this colleague of mine, and she, came over and, saw the baby, so we had a very close relationship. It was kind of like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a baby. It was one of my better friends from work. And so we were, excited about the fact that, she was pregnant. Well, on the day our son was baptized, she went into labor and ended up, the umbilical cord had become wrapped around the baby's head and had ended up somehow getting, I don't know if it was the head or just somehow got kinked or what, but the baby ended up dying. My understanding was it had something to do with the umbilical cord. It's a very rare occurrence, but it had happened. And she delivered a stillborn baby. And, that was a pretty, big blow, like, I mean, here's somebody who's been trying to have a baby, and then they deliver this, beautiful little baby, and it's no longer alive. And then that happened, and then I don't remember if it was just a few months later or it was a year later, but the woman I worked with, her mother died like on Christmas Eve, which she had cancer, so it wasn't a complete surprise, but she died on Christmas Eve. And then about a year or so ago, her husband's father ended up having a sudden heart attack and died. And then she got laid off, which I got laid off from that job as well, because we worked for a newspaper, and it wasn't not exactly like not exactly the most stable area. And then her husband ended up getting laid off just a few weeks ago. And so, I just sit there and I think about like compared to their life, I've got some problems, trust me. But, I have an ex-wife. That's not to say anything, but, obviously life isn't going exactly how I would have planned it. You don't get married thinking you're going to get divorced, or if you do, you've not entered into it with the right frame of mind. And so what happens is, even though I have had a lot of negatives, I look at them and I think, boy, I would have a hard time living my life if I was in their situation. It would be tough, right? That strikes me. And so I can sit here and learn from that. But yet I also think that I haven't suffered in that way. And I think of a lot of people who've suffered in that way. People who grow up in like Syria right now, where there's, these are people who are forcing to walk to Europe. This is like saying, hey, your home's being bombed. There's no hope. ISIS is here. The Syrian government's here. They're blowing things up. We can't stay here in Springfield or wherever you're at while you're watching this. We need to pack up our bags and walk to California. Imagine that. This is a decision people are making by the millions right now in today's day and age, to pack up their bags and walk thousands of miles because of the conditions in their homeland in order to escape it. Let alone to carry your children and everything else. People are getting onto rickety boats and crossing the ocean, and then the boats fall apart and their kids drown. These are the things that people do because of the situation in Europe right now. And so I think that sometimes we have a tendency to undervalue the negative in the world. And what I want to kind of encourage you to do is to say, there is a lot of evil, there's a lot of suffering. Why does God let people suffer so much? If God were truly good and God were truly all-powerful, God would surely stop this. And that is what the problem of evil is suggesting.